Mira and HarlequinAudio present Stand-In Wife by Debbie Macomber, performed by Lisa Zimmerman.
Prologue. The morning was bleak, the sky gray and overcast. The phone call from the hospital woke Paul Manning from a sound sleep. His first decent sleep since his daughter, Kelsey Diane, was born 72 hours earlier. Because of toxemia, his wife Diane had been placed in intensive care as a precaution. Things got quickly worse, however, complicated by the fact that Diane had been born with only one kidney. Generally, the toxins disappeared from the mother's body following birth, but in Diane's case, that hadn't happened. Instead, they'd attacked her liver and kidney, and before Paul fully realized the seriousness of her condition, she'd slipped into a coma. Paul and Diane's sister Leah had held a vigil at her side. After 2 days, Dr. Charman had sent them home, promising to contact Paul if there was any change. Now he had. "Could you come to the hospital?" he asked. "What's wrong?" Paul demanded, frightened by the weariness in the physician's voice. "It'd be best if you came to the hospital. I'll explain everything once you're here." It wasn't supposed to happen like this. A half-hour later, Paul Manning was shouting the words in his mind, but not a sound passed his lips. He was overwhelmed by pain, disbelief, shock. They'd punched him viciously, knocking the wind from his lungs. Dizzy and weak, he slumped into the hospital chair. "We did everything we could," Dr. Charman murmured, his voice subdued with defeat. Women gave birth, but they didn't die from it. Not in this day and age. Not when they were at one of the best medical facilities in the country. The pregnancy had begun in a completely routine manner. Diane had never seemed healthier. Then, in the 8th month, she developed toxemia. Paul hadn't been too concerned, blithely unaware of how deadly her condition would prove to be. Diane had suffered from toxemia during her first pregnancy, too, and everything had turned out all right. The twins had been born 6 months premature, but the toxemia hadn't been life-threatening to either her or the boys. "Is there someone you'd like me to call?" Paul glanced up and shook his head. He didn't want his family, just yet. For now, he needed to grieve alone. "I'd like to be with her for a few minutes if I could." Dr. Charman nodded and led the way down the quiet corridor to Diane's room. Paul's heart was pounding savagely, his head whirling, his legs unsteady. He felt as though he was in a nightmare, and he prayed someone would wake him up. Dr. Charman opened the door and stepped aside. "I'll wait for you here," he said. Paul nodded, surprised by the sudden calm that enveloped him. He hadn't expected to feel serenity, not when the grief, the guilt and pain were crushing his heart. The first thing he noticed was that all the tubes had been disconnected. His wife's face glowed with a beauty that transcended anything he'd ever known. For a moment, he was sure Dr. Charman had made a mistake, that Diane was only sleeping. He remembered the first time he'd met Diane, 6 years earlier. He'd been in the Army, stationed in Alaska, and she'd come up for the summer to work in a cannery. He was nearly 30, and she was barely 21. Paul had taken one look at her, and it was as if his heart had stopped. He'd fallen in love a dozen times before, but no woman had ever affected him the way Diane Baker had. By the end of the summer, she'd decided to drop out of college and marry him. They'd talked for hours on end, planning their future. Paul's degree was in journalism, but he intended to be a novelist one day. Diane read his work, built up his confidence, convinced him he'd sell his stories. Through the years, her belief in him remained unwavering. 6 months after they were married, she was pregnant. When she had Ryan and Ronnie, Paul thought his heart would burst with pride. He had a family of his own now, a wife he adored, and 2 sons, twin sons. Then, a year ago,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?